Okay, my next review is on this book called Small Mercies by Dennis Lehane. I don't know. Anyway, I literally did 2 whole freaking giant notebook pages. I brought out the big notebook because I knew sticky notes weren't gonna cut it. Okay, so here I am, and I'm feeling very passionate about this book. So I'm gonna go ahead and I'm gonna start this for you. First of all, I just want to say this is an incredible book. It's my favorite out of all the ones that I've done on like reviews here so far. At first when I started reading it, I was a little scared. I thought it was just an excuse for this white author to be racist and like use the N-word and stuff, and basically just like, yeah, it's grody. But no, it was not. It was like insanely good writing. Loved it so much. Alright, so one of the best things about this book was there were so many good quotes, like amazing quotes, and I will go through like a bunch of them at the end of like this review here, but there was so many that I didn't get to include in my review because it's like there's so many, and like I wrote them down like in my notes app on my phone, and then I went through before I made my little list, and I found like my favorite things, and I went and I read the whole, like all the things that I had written down, and I found my favorites, what I thought was like the most impactful, but so much of it was like it just stuck in my brain. Like, wow, it blew my mind over and over again every time I read it. It's like, that's really good writing. Anyways, the plot was so awesome. Like, it was so good, and it kept me excited throughout the whole story. Like, it wasn't boring at all. I loved it so much. The storytelling was superb, by the way. Yeah, the whole story itself was really good, except for there was like one thing they did where they like changed the point of view, and I wasn't a huge fan of that, and I understand why it was like necessary, but like I didn't think it was necessary. Like, you could have told it through like the same point of view, I feel like. Just like, I don't know. Anyway, I didn't like that part, but it was fine. It was still good. The chapters have really clever endings that are like really good. Like, the last book that I was reading, I did not like the chapters because it was those. I didn't like the endings of the last book that I was reading, the endings of the chapters, because it was those stupid one-liners that are supposed to grab your attention, you know, those little banger lines, that's what I called them. And this book did not do that. And it ended the chapters in a clever way that was smart and made sense and didn't feel like lazy writing, and I loved that part so much about it. Let's see. Okay, the setting of this book was laid out so clearly and so well, like without being boring. Whenever I read a book personally, I like get really bored whenever they try to like explain all this setting stuff to me, but this book did an incredible job of like putting it all out there within the story for you to like figure it out on your own and like picture it in your head and it still be interesting to you. Okay, also, I like never did the actual like description of the book or told you what it was about really. So if you don't know what it's about, this is not gonna have any spoilers, by the way. I'm just gonna hit the main plot points that are basically told within the cover of the book here, because I don't want to spoil it for anybody in case you want to know. But basically this description up here is like literally exactly what this book is. It's an all-consuming tale of revenge, family, love, festering hate, and insidious power set against one of the most tumultuous episodes in Boston's history. Which I think that's actually a description for a different book that this author wrote, but it must be very similar because it's like perfect for this book. Anyway, it's set in 1974 in Boston, where this lady is trying to find her daughter who's gone missing, and there's an Irish mob, and a young black man has been killed, and there's a lot of racism that they talk about, and so it's set in the time where in Boston they started this busing, which was when they started like busing black children into predominantly white schools and white children into predominantly black schools. and that was like literally about to happen. So that's one of the hugest plot points of this book. They're constantly are like protests and stuff against this, and it's one of the main talking points between all of the characters, one of the main points about, I mean, the entire plot and why the plot even happened. But yeah, so if you didn't know what that was, that's that. I loved the concept of the ending of this book, but I did not necessarily love the execution of the last bit of it. Like, the execution of the entire ending was so great, except for right at the end, the last like 3 words, and it was like it ended and it felt like it needed something else to come after it. Like, that's how it was written, and I was like, hello? But maybe that was on purpose or something, because it's like, you know, there's gonna be more and more chapters to this and fighting racism and all this stuff and this entire story, so maybe that's why they did that. But I don't know, I didn't really like it that much, although once again the concept of it was phenomenal. Basically in this book, when they had the climax, it was so early in the book, and it was like, whoa. And then I was like, how are they gonna even top this? And then it just kept staying like at a climax. Like, the story went, I don't know. Yeah, so basically after the book hit its peak, it stayed right there at the peak, and it just kept adding plot onto that like awesome part. So it was really great, like incredible. Okay, so now it's time to get to these little quotes that I love. And some of them are funny, and some of them are like thought-provoking, but you'll know which is which. And so the first one is basically there's a mother arguing with her daughter about being like a hippie, and the daughter says, "I can put on a bra no problem. What's your cure for being an asshole?" And that was hilarious. The next one was, there was this man who was making a speech about how God made people black and white and all the different races and stuff, and he didn't make us like 2 different races, like half and half down the middle, you know, like, you know what I mean. And then he said he didn't make us mixed because he doesn't want us to mix, and it really like makes your mind think about like how people thought back then. And I'm sure, and yeah, so I was saying I'm sure there are still people who think like that, but it's just also just, it makes you really, really understand more about why there was such a big pushback on this like integration and all this stuff. And there was a lot of this like stuff from like white people's point of view, which I'm not trying to say I agree with it in the slightest at all, but it like makes you start understanding what their thought processes were, and like how crazy it was when they're like being so racist without like batting an eyelash at it. But anyway, yeah, it's just crazy to even think about. But next up we have "I hit you with a brick," Big Peg said when they wheeled her into the hospital room to visit Mary Pat. "A brick. Next time he's a cinder block," Mary Pat said. That was hilarious. Alright, next quote. "At least when Rum was a kid, you knew your neighbors. You shared your food and your rituals and your music. Blah, blah, blah. One thing they couldn't take from you," was like all that stuff. "But they could. They would. They were. Forcing their notions and their ways and their lies on you." So that was just like this huge rant about like, well, explaining kind of like the systematic racism that was like going on right here when they were doing this busing stuff, where they were trying to integrate, and people are getting mad about it because they're like, this is our way of life, and we've always been separate like this, and now you're trying to push us together and like make us like just meld our ways of life, and thinking it's not going to work, and there's no way it could ever work because we're not the same, and thinking whites are so much better than blacks. We can't live these same lives like this, which is so crazy that it was just in the book, just right. There were some points where it was like really great writing, where they revealed some crazy plot points very well, and you know, I didn't put those quotes in here because like that'd spoil stuff for you, but it was just really great writing. Next up, like with the busing stuff, they talked about how the whites who were in control weren't the ones being affected by all this stuff, but they were the ones who were pitting these 2 groups against each other. So basically it's like these poor working white people versus poor working black people. So really, it just goes to show these people were like in the same situation here, not entirely, because obviously the whites were so much more privileged, but like the same situation with being in a difficult position with these like white people who were in control. So that was like interesting to like think about there. And of course the black people had so much worse. But yeah, I can't even begin to imagine that. Alright, next quote. Here we go. Sorry, I promise I'm literally getting closer to the end. It's not the end, I'm sorry. Anyway, it was this guy and this girl who were like seeing each other, and their conversation was like, the guy said, "You've had a lot of guys?" "For sure," she says easily. "You? Guys? No. But women? Yeah." That was so funny. I don't know why they put that in there, but it was hilarious. Anyway, next, they had this quote where it was like basically talking about how structured racism is bad, but this busing solution was not basically a solution to the issue. And then the lady, she goes, "Well, then what is?" And he was like speechless, and he's like, "I have no idea." And that was like, oh, that made you think. That made you think about it, because it's like, you know, what are you gonna do? It's like, maybe it's not a perfect solution, but do you have a better option? Like, what other options do we have? Okay, next up, I didn't put like the quote in here, but basically the scene was just the funeral of the black boy who was killed in the story, and so it's written so well because it's basically showing the remorse of this white woman who's the mother of this girl who killed this boy, or who helped kill him. And so it like talks about how she's like nearly throwing up the whole time, and it's like, it's still though, at some point during this funeral they like are talking about this racism and stuff and how it needs to stop, and she still has it like ingrained into her head, where she's like still thinking literally before she can even stop herself about how, but we are different, like, and it's just so crazy. But then she still like it, like she hates herself for it, so it's crazy. Next quote, we're getting closer. She splurges on a new purse for her gun. That was really funny, dude. There are some hilarious lines in this, like the banger lines in the last book, no bueno, did not like them. The banger lines in this book, perfecto. Hashtag love them. Anyway, next one, they have a character death, which is absolutely insane. Like, it's crazy good writing. And then it's also crazy how within this death they like insinuate a little bit of gay behind the scenes action, and it's like so casual the way they throw it in there, which is like so awesome. And I wish they'd been able to spend more time there, but at the same time I'm like, it's so cool that they just like don't, like, because it's just like this thing, like, you know, this book of all these issues, they just kind of skip over the gayness, which is just so hilarious. I love it so much. Next up, there is they're talking about how this sister's revenge trip is looked down upon within like everybody in this community, even by like her sister. And so her sister is Peg, and they say it pisses Peg off knowing what Mary Pat did to the family's rep. It's gonna take time, maybe a lot of it, to get their good name back. And it's crazy because she was doing this thing like sort of in like a good light, or in a good way to like avenge her own family, like her own daughter and stuff. And it's just crazy the way that they like talk about it right after it happened, and how it's probably like how people thought about it too, which, I don't know, makes you think once again. But anyways, last quote. There's an interesting choice of phrasing here when they say, "like with Jules and another woman's husband." And I thought that was so interesting, because usually they do it the opposite way, where it's like talking about the men and how the men own the women.